I walked into the kitchen on Christmas Eve and pressed play on my phone. My daughter-in-law grabbed the counter like the floor had opened beneath her. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand exactly how we got to that moment. Follow my story to the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this has reached. My name is Hugh, and I am 76 years old. I live in a small town about 2 hours north of Ottawa, the kind of place where everybody knows your truck before they know your name. I spent 38 years working for a pulp and paper mill on the edge of town, started as a floor hand at 18, and worked my way up to shift supervisor managing a crew of 45 men. My wife Joan and I raised our son Mitchell in a little bungalow on Hemlock Road, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a garage. I converted into a workshop because Joan said my sawdust was ruining her kitchen floor. Joan passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they found it, there was nothing left to do but make her comfortable. She went in November, right before the first real snowfall, and I remember standing at the bedroom window watching the flakes come down and thinking the world looked exactly the way I felt inside, empty and white and impossibly still. Joan was the kind of woman who left instructions for everything. Where to find the insurance papers, how to defrost the chest freezer without flooding the basement, which neighbor had a spare key. She even left me a note taped inside the medicine cabinet that said, "Hugh, eat a vegetable. I mean it." That was Joan, practical right down to her last breath. What she couldn't prepare me for was the loneliness. I'd been married for 49 years. I didn't know how to exist in a house that didn't have her voice in it. The mornings were the worst. Joan used to put the kettle on at 6:15 every single day, and for months after she died, I'd wake up at 6:14 expecting to hear it click. Mitchell was our only child. Joan had complications after his birth, and the doctors told us no more, so we poured everything into him. Hockey registration, science fair projects, driving lessons in the church parking lot. He was a quiet kid, more bookish than athletic, but he had his mother's stubbornness and my work ethic. He got a degree in accounting from Carleton, which Joan and I paid for by refinancing the house. We never told him that part. Parents don't. He met Kendra at a tax seminar in Toronto when he was 29. She was sharp, well-dressed, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately starts calculating what everything costs. I noticed that about her the first time Mitchell brought her home for Thanksgiving. She complimented our house, but her eyes were appraising it, the way a real estate agent looks at a property before deciding if it's worth listing. Joan noticed it too. She pulled me aside while we were doing dishes and said, "Hugh, that girl is measuring our curtains." I laughed it off because Mitchell seemed happy, and isn't that all any parent wants? They married 2 years later. Kendra wanted the wedding at a resort in Muskoka, which ran about $42,000 when everything was tallied up. Her parents contributed $5,000. Mitchell asked me for help, and I pulled $30,000 from our retirement savings. Joan and I had been setting that money aside for 25 years, putting in a little every payday, watching it grow. I handed it over because my son asked, and because Joan squeezed my hand under the table and said, "He's our boy, Hugh." That was 2 years before Joan got sick. Sometimes I wonder if she'd have been less worried about money during her treatment if we'd kept that $30,000. Sometimes I try not to think about it at all. After Joan died, I managed on my own for about a year and a half. I kept the bungalow clean, shoveled my own driveway, cooked simple meals the way Joan had taught me. I wasn't thriving exactly, but I was surviving, and at my age that counts for something. I had my routines. Coffee with my neighbor Dougal every Wednesday morning, cribbage at the Legion on Friday nights, Sunday dinners at the diner on Main Street where the waitress knew to bring me the roast beef without asking. Then, last winter, I took a bad fall on the ice coming back from the mailbox. Broke my left wrist and bruised 3 ribs. Nothing life-threatening, but it scared me. I was lying in the snow for 20 minutes before Dougal's wife saw me from their kitchen window and called an ambulance. 20 minutes in -28. That's the kind of cold that kills people my age. Mitchell drove up from Ottawa the next day. He sat at my kitchen table looking worried, and Kendra stood behind him with her arms crossed. already doing calculations. "Dad, you can't keep living alone out here," Mitchell said. "What if nobody had seen you?" Dougal's wife saw me. What if she hadn't? He had a point, and I was too sore to argue. Kendra suggested I move in with them. They'd just bought a house in Kanata, a big place, 4 bedrooms, finished basement, the kind of house that costs $700,000 in today's market. Mitchell said they had a spare room on the main floor, close to a bathroom, perfect for me. What I didn't know then was that they were short on the down payment, about $60,000 short. Mitchell called me 2 days later and said they were having trouble with the bank. "How much do you need?" I asked. $60,000. I closed my eyes. That was everything Joan and I had left. The savings account, the GICs, the small investment portfolio our financial advisor at the credit union had helped us build over the years. Everything. But I thought about lying in the snow, and I thought about the empty house, and I thought about Mitchell saying, "Perfect for you, Dad," and I said yes. I sold the bungalow on Hemlock Road for $210,000, which was less than it was worth, but the market was soft and I wanted it done quickly. $60,000 went to Mitchell and Kendra for the house. The rest I put into a new savings account and some GICs at my credit union in town. I kept that account in my name only. Call it instinct. Call it something Joan's voice in my head told me to do. Moving into their house felt wrong from the first week, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Kendra was polite. Mitchell was attentive. The room was comfortable, but there was something performed about all of it, like actors hitting their marks in a play they'd rehearsed too many times. I tried to make myself useful. I cooked dinner most nights because Kendra claimed she was too busy with her social media consulting business, which, as far as I could tell, involved taking photos of coffee cups and typing on her phone. I maintained the yard, fixed the leaky tap in the basement bathroom, replaced a section of fence that was rotting from the bottom up. I paid $600 a month toward groceries and another $400 toward utilities. My pension covered it without trouble, but the principle mattered to me. I wasn't going to be a freeloader. For 18 months, I convinced myself this arrangement was working. I had my routines. Morning walks around the neighborhood when the weather allowed, a bench in the backyard where I'd sit with my coffee and watch the birds. Phone calls with Dougal every Sunday, though the distance between us was growing, and we both knew it. Then came Christmas Eve. I'd been in bed since 9 o'clock. The house was quiet except for the furnace cycling on and off, which I'd been meaning to look at because the igniter sounded rough. I got up around 10:30 to use the bathroom, and that's when I heard their voices floating up from the kitchen below. Kendra was speaking first. She always spoke first. After New Year's, we tell him. Briarwood has a room available, January 15th. My hand froze on the bathroom doorknob. "I don't know, Kendra." Mitchell's voice. Hesitant, the way it always was when she was steering him somewhere he didn't want to go. "He seems fine. He's not confused or anything." "That's not the point," she said, and I could picture her shaking her head the way she does when she thinks someone is being slow. "The point is, we need the space. I'm turning his room into my office. I can't run a business from the kitchen table forever." But he gave us $60,000, and we're grateful. That's exactly why we're placing him somewhere decent and not just kicking him to the curb. Briarwood costs $6,000 a month. His pension and old age security cover most of it. We top up the difference for a few months, and then we apply for power of attorney and manage everything from his accounts directly. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. I pressed my shoulder against the wall and focused on breathing quietly. "What if he doesn't want to go?" Mitchell asked. "He doesn't get a choice. I've already spoken to Dr. Redmond about getting a cognitive assessment done. If we can get him flagged for early-stage cognitive decline, the transition is automatic. Nobody questions a family placing an elderly parent with documented memory issues. But he doesn't have memory issues." Mitchell. Her voice went flat and cold, the way a blade goes flat before it cuts. "He's 76 years old. He repeats stories. He forgets where he puts his glasses. That's enough for a preliminary diagnosis if we frame it properly. Dr. Redmond owes me a favor from that tax situation we helped her with. She'll sign off. I stood in that hallway in my wool socks and flannel pajamas and felt something crack inside me. Not break. Crack, the way ice cracks on a lake in spring. You can still stand on it, but you know it won't hold forever. What about his savings? Mitchell asked. And that question hurt worse than anything Kendra had said, because it meant he'd already moved past whether they should do this to how they could profit from it. He's got about $150,000 in his credit union account. Once we have power of attorney, we consolidate everything. His pension, his OAS, his savings. We use it to pay down the mortgage and cover Briarwood. If we manage it right, we come out ahead by almost $3,000 a month. Come out ahead. As if I were a line item on a spreadsheet. As if 43 years at the mill and 49 years of marriage and 76 years of living could be reduced to a monthly surplus. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Joan's photograph was on the nightstand. She was smiling in it, standing in our garden holding a basket of tomatoes, and I stared at that smile until my vision blurred. Then something happened that I can only describe as Joan's voice in my head, clear as day. Hugh Drummond, you get off that bed and you fight. So I did. I barely slept. By 5 a.m, I was dressed and sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea and a yellow legal pad, the same kind I used to use for shift reports at the mill. I wrote down everything I'd heard, word for word as best I could remember. Then I started making a list of what I needed to do. First, I needed proof. I knew Kendra kept a filing cabinet in the basement office she'd been using. She locked it, but the key was in her desk drawer because Kendra was the kind of person who locked things to feel important, not because she expected anyone to actually check. I found it on the first try. Inside were documents that made my stomach turn. A printed email exchange with Briarwood Long-Term Care discussing my increasing confusion and agitation. A draft power of attorney form with my name on it. A letter from Dr. Turney, Redmond, undated, but clearly prepared in advance, stating that I showed signs of cognitive impairment consistent with early dementia. I've never been diagnosed with dementia. I've never shown signs of dementia. I do the crossword in the Ottawa Citizen every morning in ink, and I rarely miss more than 2 clues. I photographed everything with my phone. Joan had insisted I learn to use the camera function when we upgraded our phones 3 years before she died. You never know when you'll need to take a picture of something important, she'd said, and I blessed her practicality for the 100th time. Then I checked Kendra's laptop, which she'd left open on the kitchen counter with the password saved. Her browser was still logged into her email. I found conversations with her sister about their plans. Mitchell's dad is finally going into a home. We'll have the whole house to ourselves by February. There were messages with someone named Tyler that stopped me cold. Plans to meet up in Montreal, references to when Mitchell's not around. Language that made it very clear this wasn't a professional relationship. And then I found the financial documents. Credit card statements showing purchases that made no sense for a household supposedly struggling to get by. A $1,200 handbag. A weekend at a spa in Mont Tremblant. A $400 dinner at a restaurant in the Byward Market. All while Mitchell worked 60 hours a week at his accounting firm, and I contributed $1,000 a month to their household. I saved everything. Screenshots, photos, copies. I sent them to my own email. Then I deleted the sent items from her account and closed everything exactly the way I'd found it. By the time Mitchell and Kendra woke up on Christmas morning, I had a plan. But first, I had a phone call to make. I stepped out onto the back porch with my coffee and dialed Dougal. He picked up on the second ring even though it was 7 a.m. on Christmas Day. That's the kind of friend Dougal was. Merry Christmas, Hugh. Everything all right? Not exactly, I said. And I told him everything. Dougal was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Joan would burn that house down. Joan would do it strategically, I said. He laughed. What do you need from me? A place to land and a lawyer. Done and done. My cousin Alistair does elder law in Ottawa. I'll call him this afternoon. And you know the apartment above my garage? It's been empty since my boy moved to Calgary. It's yours as long as you need it. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly, but the knowledge that I wasn't completely alone. I had Dougal. I had options, and I had information that Kendra and Mitchell didn't know I had. Christmas Day itself was surreal. Kendra made a turkey that was overcooked and underseasoned, which I mentioned not to be petty, but because she'd specifically told me not to help with the cooking, because she wanted to do something special for the family. The family she was planning to dismantle in 3 weeks. Mitchell gave me a pair of wool socks and a gift card to Tim Hortons. Kendra gave me a book about mindfulness for seniors, which felt like a cruelty I'm sure she didn't even register. I gave them each envelopes with $200, because I didn't know what else to do, and because Joan had raised me to always give generously at Christmas. We sat around the table eating dry turkey and making small talk, and I watched them both with new eyes. Mitchell couldn't meet my gaze for more than a few seconds. Kendra smiled too much, the way people do when they're performing kindness rather than feeling it. Every "more gravy, Hugh," and "this is nice, isn't it?" landed on me like a small, precise blow. After dinner, I excused myself and went to my room. I sat in the chair by the window and watched the snow fall on the empty street, and thought about what I was going to do. The next 2 weeks were the most disciplined of my life. I operated with the kind of focus I hadn't felt since managing emergency shutdowns at the mill, when a boiler would trip and you had 14 minutes to secure the system before something catastrophic happened. I called Alistair, Dougal's cousin, the day after Christmas. He was sharp, thorough, and completely unsurprised by my story. "This is more common than people think," he said. "Adult children positioning themselves to take control of a parent's finances under the guise of care. The fraudulent cognitive assessment is the part that makes it criminal." The word hung in the air. "What are my options?" I asked. "Several. But first, tell me about the $60,000 you gave them for the house." This is where things got interesting. When I'd given Mitchell and Kendra the money for the down payment, Joan had still been alive, and Joan, being Joan, had insisted we do it properly. She'd had our lawyer draw up a promissory note. The $60,000 wasn't a gift. It was a loan, secured against the property, with a lien registered on the title. Mitchell had signed it. Kendra had signed it. It was filed with the land registry office. I'd almost forgotten about it. Joan had handled the paperwork, and after she died, I'd never thought to review it. But now, sitting in Alistair's office in Ottawa, I pulled out the original document and watched his eyebrows climb toward his hairline. "They owe you $60,000, he said, "secured against the house. You can call this loan at any time with 90 days' notice." I know. Do they know? I don't think Kendra's ever read a document that didn't have her name in a flattering context. Alistair actually laughed at that. "Mr. Drummond, I think we can work with this." Over the next 10 days, Alistair and I built our case. He contacted the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario about Dr. Redmond's fraudulent cognitive assessment letter. He filed a preliminary report with the Ottawa Police about potential elder abuse. He prepared a demand letter for repayment of the $60,000 loan, and he helped me draft a very specific plan for how I wanted to handle the confrontation. Because I wasn't going to sneak away in the night. I wasn't going to disappear quietly so that Kendra could tell the neighbors whatever story suited her. I was going to stand in their house and show them exactly what I knew, and I was going to do it when it would hurt the most. I chose New Year's Day. New Year's Day was Kendra's favorite holiday. She threw a brunch every year and invited her friends, her sister, and a few of Mitchell's colleagues. It was her showcase event, the day she got to play the role of gracious hostess in her beautiful home. The home I'd helped pay for. The home they were planning to push me out of. I spent New Year's Eve preparing. I connected my phone to the living room television using the Chromecast that Mitchell had installed last year. I organized every piece of evidence into a single folder on my phone. Audio of their Christmas Eve conversation, which I had been recording on a small digital recorder I kept in my bathrobe pocket since that night. Screenshots of Kendra's emails. Photos of her text messages with Tyler. The fraudulent medical documents. The credit card statements. The promissory note. I set my alarm for 6 and laid everything out on my bed. Then I sat in my chair and watched the fireworks over the city through the window and waited for midnight. The brunch started at 11. Kendra had been cooking since 8, and for once the food was decent because she'd ordered most of it from a caterer and transferred it to her own serving dishes. About 15 people showed up. Kendra's sister Melanie, 3 of her friends from whatever social circle she inhabited, Mitchell's boss and his wife, a few neighbors. I moved through the party like a ghost, smiling when spoken to, accepting a glass of sparkling cider, nodding at conversations about hockey and housing prices and the weather. Nobody paid me much attention. I was just Mitchell's elderly father, a fixture of the house, like a floor lamp or a coat rack. At 1 o'clock, after everyone had eaten and the wine was flowing, I walked over to the television and picked up the remote. "I'd like to show everyone something," I said. My voice was steady. 45 men on a mill floor will teach you how to project calm when everything inside you is burning. Mitchell looked up from his conversation with his boss. Kendra was in the kitchen doorway holding a platter of desserts. Something about my tone must have registered because she stopped moving. "Hugh, we're in the middle of brunch," she said, with that hostess smile plastered on. "This will only take a few minutes. I think everyone here should see this, especially you, Kendra." The room went quiet the way rooms do when something shifts in the atmosphere. I pressed play. The first thing that came through the television speakers was Kendra's voice, crisp and unmistakable. "After New Year's, we tell him, Briarwood has a room available January 15th. Kendra's platter hit the floor. Shrimp and phyllo pastries scattered across the hardwood like tiny explosions. Her face went white, then red, then a shade I'd never seen on a living person before. "Turn that off," she hissed. "Not yet," I said. The recording continued. Mitchell's weak protests. Kendra's plan to get a false dementia diagnosis. Their discussion of how to take control of my finances. Every word amplified to the surround sound system Mitchell had been so proud of installing. The room was frozen. Kendra's sister had her hand over her mouth. Mitchell's boss was staring at the screen with the expression of a man rapidly recalculating someone's professional character. The neighbors looked like they wanted to dissolve through the floor. When the recording ended, I switched to the screenshots. Kendra's emails to Briarwood describing my violent outbursts and wandering behavior. I have never had a violent outburst in my life. I have never wandered. I walk with purpose. Always have. Then Dr. Redmond's letter, diagnosing me with a condition I don't have, signed by a doctor I'd met once for a routine physical. Then the credit card statements. The handbag. The spa weekend. The $400 dinner, all itemized on screen while the room watched in silence. I paused before the last set of screenshots. This was the part I'd debated with myself about for days. But Kendra had planned to drug me into a nursing home and steal my money, and Mitchell had gone along with it. Mercy was a luxury I couldn't afford. I pressed play on the text messages between Kendra and Tyler. The room heard her tell Tyler that she'd be free by February, that Mitchell was useful but boring, that Tyler should book the trip to Portugal because this time next year I'll have the money. Mitchell was sitting on the couch, and I watched his face go through everything. Shock, confusion, recognition, pain. He looked at Kendra, and for the first time since he'd married her, I saw him see her clearly. Kendra lunged toward me. "Give me that phone." I held it above my head. At 76, I'm still 6'2", and Kendra is 5'5" in heels. She couldn't reach. "It's too late," I said. "Everything has been sent to my lawyer, to the police, and to the College of Physicians regarding Dr. Redmond's fraudulent assessment. You can't delete what's already been filed." She stopped reaching. Her hands dropped to her sides, and something crumbled behind her eyes. Not remorse. Kendra didn't feel remorse. It was the look of someone realizing the game was over. "You had no right," she whispered. "I had every right," I said. "You planned to steal my pension, my savings, and my freedom. You falsified medical documents. You conspired to have me committed to a long-term care facility under false pretenses. In Ontario, that's elder abuse, and it carries criminal penalties. The room started emptying. People grabbed their coats and left without making eye contact, the way Canadians do when they've witnessed something they'll be talking about for years but can't acknowledge in the moment. Kendra's sister was the last to leave. She paused at the door and looked back at Kendra with an expression that suggested this wasn't the first time Kendra's schemes had detonated in public. Within 10 minutes, it was just the three of us. Mitchell was still on the couch. He hadn't moved. His face was wet, and he was staring at the floor like it might offer some kind of answer. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I know you are. I didn't know about Tyler. You didn't want to know. The same way you didn't want to know that putting your father in a nursing home under a fake dementia diagnosis was a crime." He flinched. I let him. Kendra was standing by the kitchen island, gripping the edge of the counter with both hands. The fury had drained out of her and been replaced by something more dangerous: calculation. She was already running scenarios, looking for angles, trying to figure out how to survive this. "What do you want, Hugh?" she asked, and her voice was almost calm. "I want 3 things," I said. "First, I want my $60,000 back. Joan and I made that loan with a promissory note secured against this property. My lawyer will be sending you a formal demand letter tomorrow. You have 90 days. Mitchell's head snapped up. "What promissory note?" "The one your mother insisted on, the one you signed at our lawyer's office. The one that gives me a registered lien against this house." Kendra went very still. "That's not possible. We would have known." "You would have known if you'd read what you signed instead of just counting the zeros." "Second," I continued, "I want Dr. Redmond reported to her regulatory body. My lawyer has already filed the complaint, but I want Mitchell to provide a sworn statement confirming that I have never exhibited signs of cognitive impairment." Mitchell nodded immediately. "Of course. Dad, of course. And third, I want to leave. I'm moving out this week. I have a place to go, and I want nothing more from either of you except what you legally owe me." "You can't leave," Kendra said, and I almost laughed at the absurdity. 2 hours ago she'd been planning to force me into a nursing home, and now she was telling me I couldn't leave. "If you leave, people will think we kicked you out." "People will think whatever the evidence shows them," I said, "and the evidence is now in the hands of several lawyers and a police detective." That night, after Kendra locked herself in the master bedroom and Mitchell sat in the dark kitchen drinking scotch, I packed my things. It didn't take long: 2 suitcases, a box of books, Joan's photograph, my medications, and the wooden cribbage board Dougal had made me for my 70th birthday. That was my life, condensed into what I could carry down a flight of stairs. I moved into the apartment above Dougal's garage the next afternoon. It was small, just a bedroom, a kitchenette, and a bathroom, but it was clean and warm and mine. Dougal had put a fresh pot of coffee on and left a note on the counter that said, "Welcome home, you stubborn old goat." I sat at the kitchen table and cried for the first time since Joan's funeral, not out of sadness exactly, but out of relief. The pretending was over. The next 3 months were complicated. Alistair pursued the legal case with the thoroughness of a man who genuinely enjoyed his work. Dr. Redmond was investigated by the College of Physicians and voluntarily surrendered her license before the hearing, which told me everything I needed to know about how confident she was in her defense. The police opened an elder abuse investigation that was still ongoing. Mitchell and Kendra couldn't get the $60,000 together. Of course they couldn't. They'd been living beyond their means for years, propping up a lifestyle built on my money and Kendra's credit cards. Alistair gave them the 90 days stipulated in the promissory note, and when the deadline passed, he began the process to enforce the lien. That's when Kendra's world fell apart for real. Tyler, it turned out, had no interest in a woman whose financial situation was imploding. He stopped returning her calls in February. By March, Kendra's credit cards were maxed out, and she was fighting with Mitchell daily, their arguments loud enough that the neighbors complained. Mitchell called me in April. He sounded different, hollowed out, but also somehow lighter, like a man who'd been carrying a weight he'd finally set down. "She's gone," he said. "She moved to her sister's in Hamilton. I'm filing for divorce." How are you doing? Terrible, he said. But also, I don't know. I can breathe again. I understood that feeling. I'm seeing a counselor, he continued. Someone Alistair recommended. She specializes in people who've been in controlling relationships. I didn't even realize that's what it was until I started talking about it. It takes time to see something clearly when you've been standing too close to it, I said. Dad, I need to say something, and I need you to just listen. All right. I'm ashamed. Not just about Briarwood and the money. I'm ashamed that I forgot who you are. You're the man who drove 6 hours to see me every weekend when I was homesick at Carleton. You're the man who worked double shifts so I could have a future. You're the man who stayed single for 20 years after Mom died because you didn't want me to feel replaced. And I was going to put you in a home and steal your pension. I was quiet for a long time. I know, Mitchell. Can you forgive me? Not yet, but I'm willing to try. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the truth, and we'd had enough lies to last a lifetime. The divorce took 6 months. Kendra fought for half of everything, which was her instinct, but when Mitchell's lawyer presented the evidence of her affair and the elder abuse conspiracy, her position collapsed. She ended up with her personal belongings and her share of the credit card debt. Nothing else. The house was sold to pay off the mortgage and my lien. After everything was settled, Mitchell cleared about $40,000, which wasn't much for a man starting over at 37. But it was honest money, and that counted for something. Today, I'm sitting on Dougal's back porch, watching the leaves change color on the maples along the river. It's October now, nearly a year since that Christmas Eve when I stood in a dark hallway and heard my son and his wife plan the end of my independence. I've been living above Dougal's garage for 10 months, and it's the happiest I've been since Joan died. We've fallen into an easy rhythm, 2 old mill workers who understand each other's silences. We have coffee together in the morning. We play cribbage on Tuesday and Thursday nights. We watch the Senators' games even though they break our hearts every season. Because that's what Ottawa people do. I've also reconnected with my old life. The Legion on Friday nights. My bench at the park where I read the paper. A gardening club at the community center that Joan would have loved and that I joined because she would have wanted me to. I even started volunteering at the food bank, sorting cans and stocking shelves, because keeping busy keeps me honest. Mitchell is doing all right. He's renting a small apartment in Barrhaven and working 2 jobs, his accounting position during the day and bookkeeping for a few small businesses on evenings and weekends. He's paying me back $500 a month from the lien settlement, not because I need it, but because he needs to do it. Some debts aren't really about money. He called me last week and told me about a woman he'd met. A teacher named Ingrid, divorced with a teenage son. He described her as the opposite of Kendra in every way, which I took as a good sign. He asked if I'd like to have dinner with them sometime. I'd like that, I said. She knows everything, he said. About what happened, about what I did. She said she'd rather be with someone who's trying to be better than someone who thinks they've never done anything wrong. I thought about that for a long time after we hung up. Dougal came out with 2 beers and settled into the chair beside me. Good news? He asked. Maybe. Mitchell's got someone new. A teacher. Is she a decent person? He says she pays her own bills and drives a 10-year-old Honda. Dougal raised his beer. I'll drink to that. We sat there watching the river and the leaves in the sky turning gold at the edges. And I thought about Joan. She would have been furious about everything Kendra did, but she would have been proud of how I handled it. Joan always said I was too nice for my own good, that I let people walk on me because I confused kindness with weakness. Maybe she was right, but I think in the end, I proved that kindness and strength aren't opposites. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is refuse to accept less than you deserve. You know the funny part, I said to Dougal. What's that? If they'd just asked me, if Mitchell had sat down and said, Dad, we need more space, can we look at options together, I probably would have said yes. I was already thinking about it. The house was too big for just Joan and me, and after she died it was too big for just me. I knew I needed to make a change. I just wanted it to be my change, My choice. Dougal nodded. That's all any of us want, the right to decide for ourselves. Instead, they decided I was a problem to be solved, a budget line to be optimized, an obstacle between Kendra and the life she thought she deserved. And now she's living in her sister's basement in Hamilton, Dougal said, taking a long sip of his beer. Karma is patient, I said. Karma is Canadian, Dougal replied. She's polite about it, but she always gets you in the end. I laughed at that. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't felt in years. The kind Joan used to pull out of me when I was taking myself too seriously. My phone buzzed. A text from Mitchell. Ingrid says she'd love to meet you. How about Sunday dinner? I looked at the message for a long time. A year ago, I would have said yes immediately because that's what I always did. Said yes. Gone along. Accommodated. But I'd learned something since that Christmas Eve. I'd learned that my time and my trust were valuable, and that giving them away too easily is how you end up standing in a hallway at 10:30 at night, listening to your own son plan the end of your freedom. Sunday works, I typed back. I'll bring dessert, Joan's butter tart recipe. I put the phone down and picked up my beer. The sun was setting over the Ottawa Valley, painting the sky in colors that don't have proper names, the kind of beauty you can only see when you stop long enough to look. I'm 76 years old. I live above my best friend's garage. I have a modest pension, a good lawyer, and a cribbage board made by the most reliable man I've ever known. I don't have much, but everything I have is mine, earned honestly and held firmly, and nobody is ever going to take it from me again. Joan would be proud of that, and honestly, for the first time in a very long time, so am I.